News, and we are talking about timetables once more, and we're talking about Hendy again because Hendy was up in front of an APPG of some description, all-party parliamentary group. I can't remember which one. Talking about it's in this Rail article. You can go and have a look. Basically, talking about the fact that there is an obligation for the Transport Secretary to publish a long-term rail strategy, which will hinge on, and I quote, what the government and the country wants for the railway in line with the government's economic, political, and social roles. Yes, we know. We've been waiting for it desperately. Hendy went on. So looking at what services are needed and what can be realistically provided with the track capacity and the rolling stock that there is, I think that looking further at those things by an organisation that isn't constrained to franchising might produce a different answer. I can't promise it, but that's the sort of thing that I would expect a holistic look on the major main lines to produce. What more can you squeeze out of the West Coast Main Line? It's full. What's kind of worrying is that he then goes on and starts talking about direct services to like Sheffield, and then starts talking about open access. He said, well, maybe a future railway might have come to a different answer. Which, remember that he's a millionaire because of First Group, and again, you have to question his motives in suggesting actually that the wrong decision has been made by the RR, and that maybe there should be more open access on an extremely congested long distance mainline. It's already baffling that Lumo got their Stirling service in, running diesel under the wires for every meter of the journey. I just, very puzzling. The comments came at a time when Avanti West Coast is cutting 12% of its summer services between July 20th and August 28th, though it expects an increase in leisure travel, particularly at weekends. Meanwhile, on the East Coast Main Line, journeys are up nearly 50%, and LNER reckons that that's because there's just a lot of extra capacity in the new timetable, and that is driving demand. It's not rocket science. And then Hendy then bizarrely goes off on one about ticketing and said, we started on LNER. I think if you book early enough and book the right trains, it won't make any difference. It might even turn out to be cheaper, right? And we've started that in the city regions as well with pay-as-you-go. But we've got to do far more of it because a railway system with 50 million fares is not an intelligent railway system. He's just talked about making fares more complicated, having more demand-responsive fares. You have to do one or the other. You either make them, to make fares simpler, you have to make them broadly cheaper. You cannot, and to make them cheaper, without impacting on revenue, you have to make them more complicated. It's a fairly straightforward equation. Anyway, more deck chair rearrangements being proposed. Meanwhile, in the real world, while we faff about with the railway in decline, an ECIU study, basically it's YouGov have basically gone out and done some work, and they found that 3/4 of media coverage of the June heatwave did not mention climate change at all, whereas YouGov found that 71% of Britons think climate change was a likely cause of the high temperatures. So British people, 71% of them thinking that that climate change was likely to have been a factor in the heatwave, which they're spot on about. And meanwhile, 3/4 of media coverage of the June heatwaves didn't mention climate change. This is a remarkably damning indictment of our press and its representation of people's actual interests and worries. Also, 2,700 of us died in the heat waves in May and June, let alone the July ones and the August ones and the blah, blah, blah. Folks, this is bad. Also, thanks to Met Office and other modelling, allows us to see that the human-induced climate change added 3 to 4 degrees to the heat wave. We know that 1,100 of those deaths are directly attributable to climate change. It is literally killing people in Britain right now. And, the industry is responding to that. Eurostar's new double-decker trains are going to be modified to cope with temperatures up to 55 degrees, whereas they were previously... It's also funny. These are called Celestias, Celsius Celestia. There's kind of a funny thing going on there. Anyway, Alstom was originally going to bring these trains out in 2031, and they were going to cope with temperatures up to 45 degrees Celsius, but they're going to now be modified to do with another 10 degrees on top of that, thanks to the increasing battling heat waves that these trains are going to have to deal with as they cross, particularly into the European mainland. It means that they're going to have beefier aircon, which means quite dramatically greater hotel power being consumed by these trains, which means power supply upgrades required, which means it does high speed one have enough juice in the wires. Thoughts on a postcard on that one? Related to the Channel Tunnel is the fact that ScotRail, as of today, at the time of recording, which is Tuesday, a working group has been established by Caledonian Sleeper to consider, as was promised, I think, as a manifesto promise, sending sleeper trains through to mainland Europe. A working group has met for the first time to deliver a feasibility study, so it's not actually promising anything, it's just a study and a study and a study, examining the potential very loose wording, for a direct Caledonian sleeper service to mainland Europe. My belief at this point is that it will fizzle out. It'll be determined as being too complicated. But let's see what happens. It's always good to see what these things have to say. I've mixed feelings on sending sleepers through the channel. I think that if you can fit them in freight paths and they're not getting in the way of anything else, why not? In the same breath, I'd far prefer very cheap. The sleeper is a very expensive service. I'd far prefer that we were conveyor belting far more high-speed services through that piece of spectacular infrastructure. And keep your eyes peeled. More on that. I'm going to be concluding some work on that this week. Keep your eyes peeled, because there's some interesting stuff I have to say about that coming out soon. But is it the return of Night Star? No, probably not. While we're in Europe, car dependence in Europe again. It's just this graph that I spotted from the OCO Institute, which is interesting, because it's pointing out the share of the population that either use public transport less than once a month or never. So it's picking up people who just basically never use public transport. Obviously, the UK has disappeared into thin air there because, Brexiting. But what's really interesting is that Italy and France feature a huge percentage of people who just never use public transport. That's very interesting to me. Spain doing far better. It's a very interesting... Norway doing very well. It's a very, very interesting graphic, this one. Rather than going, well, isn't it great that we have this mode share, it's going, well, what percentage of people are just never using public transport, are never finding public transport interesting or useful or fitting with their livelihoods? That, for me, is a very interesting bit of data. And I'd love to dig into that further. I'd love there to be a UK version of that data set. If there is, shout, tell me. Friend of the show, Adam Tranter here, has been out on his travels and has been spotting little buses. And I love these little buses. So it's saying every city should have these cute little electric buses. And I solidly agree. Cute little buses. Have them everywhere. Look, there's a little space inside the little bus. It's not too bad. Space for, it's got a disabled access ramp. This is exactly what you put into your car-free cities, is little buses. Have them absolutely everywhere. You can paint them pink. They're very cute. They can be fully electric because they're tiny. The tinier they are, the easier the better they run on batteries, because they don't load the batteries too hard. Look at these cute little monkeys. Fab. I'm all for these. Brilliant little thing. They should be everywhere. They should York should just have these whizzing around in the centre of the city. All for them. Brilliant. I love them.
One of the biggest things this government is doing is putting more power back into the hands of local communities. For too long, many decisions have been made in Westminster by people who don't know the challenges different areas face every day. We're changing that. We're giving more powers to local mayors and leaders so they can make decisions that are right for the people that they represent. Take buses, for example. Instead of services being decided by private operators, local leaders can decide the routes, the timetables and the fares, making sure that buses actually work for the people that rely on them. That means better connections, more reliable services, and public transport that's designed around your local community. We're already seeing it at work in places like here in Greater Manchester, and coming soon to places like South and West Yorkshire. At the end of the day, the people who know an area best are the people who live and work there. Giving local communities more control means better decisions, better transport, and more opportunities for everyone.
I mean, nothing to disagree with there. Heidi Alexander talking about this a bit as well. A couple of things here. Firstly, a lot of what's been talked about here is just a continuation of original Tory plans, bus back better type things. Great. The locally funded transport schemes up to 500 million no longer needing Whitehall approval is interesting to me. That is interesting. I'm very curious to know exactly what that looks like, but that is potentially valuable. Not least because, rightly, I hope that will make schemes that involve an annual rolling programme of funding possible, because that 500 million should be, oh, cool, well, the size of our project is going to be this then, and then this, and then this. And you keep your project within 500 million and you just keep delivering it. That, to me, is potentially quite interesting. What the actual nuts and bolts of it are, what the actual relationship with central government on that one really is, and the relationship with Treasury and that 500 million I'm very interested in, but curious and cynical about. But that potentially is very, very interesting, and fair play, that could be big. There's also some devolution going on at a broader level as well. The ability to retain more business rates, I believe, for local authorities is also good, positive. So some small fry stuff. This is not seismic. It's small fry, but someone actually having the conversation saying there should be some relinquishment of centralized power is not a bad thing. So watch this space, but some small rays of sunshine in amongst the general misery here. This is a good one. Merseyrail is going to be state-owned and I hope brought into public ownership, and I hope specifically and directly by Liverpool City region to retain its branding and retain to be honest, they need to develop a Liverpool City region identity. They haven't done that yet. Mersey Travel obviously exists, but it's very bitty. I hope they develop their own identity and roll that out, because it's all very well just saying these are our trains, but it needs to be part of a bigger story. And frankly, Liverpool is not doing a good enough job of having a coherent story on transport. The huge development happening on the waterfront are essentially public transport free, other than the idea of putting in a few bendy buses. It's not good enough. But again, this is something. It's some level of coherence, and again, it means hopefully that it won't be smashed up with the horrible GBR. The generic GBR branding. It will be its own identity, its own powerful multimodal identity as TfL gets. And there's also some comments here from Burnham himself while giving a bit of a sort of speech around his bus fare cap specifically. The Prime Minister has told Bristol Live he will fund the billions needed for a mass transit system for Bristol, Bath and the west of England, saying he wanted to create integrated functioning public transport which will help grow the economy in the region. This is what you kind of said. It's not as committal as that. So let's have a listen. I think some initial funding has been given to start the work to look at options. I missed doing voices. People shouted at me when I did voices, and I loved it. The West of England got £750 million, which I think is the most ever and a sign of our commitment. But more would be needed, obviously, to deliver mass transit. Yes, in the long run, I want to put that investment in so that all cities have integrated functioning public transport, supporting people into jobs and growing the economy. The evidence from Greater Manchester is really clear. We had a decade of above average growth, partly because we had a transport system that could support a growing economy. If you want growth, you have to make the investment to get it. I mean, spot on. Where's that investment coming from, though? Is that central government investment? Because it shouldn't be. It should be Bristol. Here's money, spend it how you like, and we will not tell you off. That's your money now. So mixed feelings on that. And also, it's continuing our theme from quite a number of episodes ago. And we were chatting to Mariam about the fact that we want to make transport political again. I want leading politicians. That's the Prime Minister saying the thing. He's saying the transport thing. He's saying it. And if he says it, it means we can hold him to account on it. I don't think I ever heard Starmer talking about this sort of thing. Briefly Rachel Reeves did when she was squiggling out lines on a map and writing the word tram, despite the fact that her central government was the one who'd got in the way of it. So, again, tentatively positive about this. And, we know there's just an unending supply of evidence about the fact that trams, and indeed more than trams, frankly, are necessary for big cities. I mean, trams are necessary for medium-sized cities. Samuel Bancroft of The Exchange, I think that The Exchange is a new Leeds publication. Well worth going and having a look at them. Samuel Bancroft, someone tell me who owns it anyway. Samuel Bancroft has done some number crunching for a new article, which is well worth having a read. Since the 1950s, Leeds has got bigger, but the city has effectively shrunk. Because the public transport network of 1957 is that much larger than it is today, it actually put 450-ish thousand of today's residents within 30 minutes of Briggate. The network that actually exists today only reaches 256,000 people. So that means the city has essentially got smaller. And the areas that have lost the most in terms of public transport accessibility are Middleton, Belle Isle, Hunslet, Hare Hills and Chapeltown. In 1957, the city's best infrastructure catered to its poorest residents. Today, the opposite is the case. Oh, it's almost as if we did an episode on this, a bumper 2-hour Leeds episode for our 300th. The Leeds episode, well worth diving in. Anyway, that was only about a week ago that Samuel wrote that. Leeds borrowed its tram network. Did it shrink the city? Well worth diving in, having a look. It looks like a very nice bit of local news work going on. So all for it. Samuel, give us a shout. A pleasure. Nice bit of work you've done there. Network Rail issued some letters. Don't flipping do this, everyone. This letter says, this is in Cardiff, community relations, being sent out to a railway neighbour. Dear neighbour, railway work near your home. It's not even It's not even a mail merge, it's just a single letter they printed out loads of and delivered manually, presumably. Railway work near your home, rail adjusting at Llwyn. Please enter letter content here, ... Yours sincerely, Community Relations. So I have a number of things to complain about here. Number one, don't just have generic community relations. Have a human. Have a human that the person can then know that they're speaking to. Don't just have generic community relations. There is someone in a team who is at a level of responsibility where they should have their name against this letter, so that when you receive a letter explaining that the railway is doing some stuff that might piss you off, you have a human who has told you it and they've explained why. Secondly, check your mail merge, folks. Do not ever, ever, ever send a letter that has a generic content placeholder. What are we doing here? This is deeply embarrassing. So Wales and Western, Nick, find out who did this and give it meat with no biscuits. This is shoddy work. And, Wales and Western under Nick Millington. Nick Millington's a very good person in my experience, a good person in the railway, really cares about the railway and does a lot of good stuff. This doesn't do him any credit. And I'd recommend that this gets fixed and to some apologies. This is a really good example of very bad relations with our neighbour relationship development and stakeholder management. Extremely poor. Talking of getting things wrong, this is an interesting one. HS2 extension, there's BBC covering that the HS extension, a tunnel extension specifically, did not have permission, court rules. Well, specifically, Lord Justice Holgate has said that a tunnel extension in the West Midlands and a portal that was authorised by the 2017 Act did not map onto the planning permission that that was later not, or the planning permission that was gained and then did not incorporate the extension. So when the tunnel's construction was authorised, the western portal was to be in Washwood Heath, next to the depot, and the eastern portal would be in Castle Bromwich. Both of these were located within the Birmingham City Council area. During 2020, HS2 decided the tunnel should be extended to the east by a further 3 kilometres, so the tunnel would have an overall length of nearly 6 kilometres, double the length of the original tunnel. The tunnel's eastern portal will be constructed further to the east so as to emerge in Water Orton, which is not under the City Council. This is not within the planning permission. But I'm kind of like, well, so what? What are we going to do? Fill the tunnel in? I don't get it. What does this gain anyone? Who's gained by this, and how is this useful? I agree it's not good that HS2 screwed up their permissions and cracked on. In the same breath, I don't understand what's the remedy here? What's the useful remedy that helps anyone? I don't know. Strange one. And pertinently, given the topic we're discussing tonight, but I suppose a positive one, which is that the slow march continues. ETCS has indeed arrived at long last on the East Coast Main Line proper. I think well into Hitchin have now got is now having ETCS rolled out on it. We've long given up on putting ETCS into central London or certainly to King's Cross, but it is now on the actual proper East Coast Main Line. Yes, very interesting to see how that goes, and interesting to see whether we hit the next deadline now that Levan is in place. Let's see. I'll be watching with interest because this is actually still the future, even if the programme itself has been, up till May at least, a bit of a shambles. Let's see.